Some men build things their whole lives. I built furniture. 41 years of sawdust in my lungs and calluses so thick I could barely feel a splinter anymore. I never built anything as fragile as trust, though, and I never understood how fast it could come apart in your hands until the day I stood in a courthouse hallway in Dayton, Ohio, watching a bailiff lead my son out of a courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him, his eyes searching the gallery for me like I was still going to be the one who fixed it. I want you to know something before we go any further. I didn't put him there. He put himself there. I just stopped standing in the way. 11 years, Grant. 11 years I stood in the way for you. And you thought I'd stand there forever. The courtroom doors swung shut behind him with a heavy metal click, and somewhere behind me, his fiancée let out a sound I can only describe as a wounded animal. She turned to me, mascara already ruined, and said it loud enough for the whole hallway to hear. "How could you do this to your own son?" I didn't answer her. I just watched the doors. If you're new around here, welcome. I tell these stories because somebody needs to hear them. Maybe you, maybe somebody you love. Go ahead and hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I promise you, this one's going to sit with you a while. Let me back up though, because you need the whole picture before you can understand that hallway. And trust me, it isn't what you think. 4 days before that courtroom, I'd finished a cabinet install out in Kettering and gotten home around 6. I still run my own little shop, Voss Fine Woodworking. Just me and my nephew Denny 3 days a week now that my knees have decided they're done climbing ladders. 38 years, in the same shop, off Route 4. I drive 11 Ford F-250 that's got more Bondo than original paint at this point, and I've never once thought about trading it in. I pulled into the driveway of the house on Larchmont Avenue, the same house I bought when I was 28, and figured I'd fill up with a family that stayed whole. Mine didn't stay whole. The house did. The house has been quiet for 3 years now. Grant moved into an apartment across town after Bethany passed, technically to be closer to his fiancée, Kayla, which was his way of saying he wanted his own space, and I understood that. I really did. I went upstairs like I do most nights, a habit I never told anybody about, not Denny, not my sister, where I go into the room that used to be ours, and I sit on the edge of the bed, and I open the cedar box on Bethany's dresser, and I look at her wedding ring. Just look at it. I don't even always take it out. I just lift the lid, let the light hit the little diamond, and for about 30 seconds, my wife is sitting right there beside me again. That Tuesday, I opened the box, and my whole body went cold before my mind caught up to why. It was too light. You know that feeling where your body understands something's wrong a full second before your brain does? I lifted the lid all the way, empty, red velvet lining, and nothing sitting in it. I stood there for I don't know how long, staring into that little hollow where a ring should have been. Bethany's wedding ring. The one I'd saved 4 months' wages for back in 1987. The one she wore every single day for 36 years, including the last one, in hospice, when her fingers had gotten so thin, the nurse had to tape it to keep it from sliding off. The one thing left in this house that still had the shape of her hand pressed into the metal. I didn't feel angry yet. I felt hollowed out, like somebody had reached into my chest with a cold hand and scooped something loose. I checked the other drawers. I checked the fireproof box in the closet. I checked every place that ring could conceivably be, even though some part of me already knew exactly what had happened and exactly who'd done it. Only one other person's ever had a key to this house since Bethany died. I called him. It rang 3 times before he picked up, and I could hear noise in the background. A bar, maybe, music, laughing. "Hey, Dad, kind of a bad time." "Grant, where's your mother's ring?" Silence, then too smooth, too quick. "What ring, Dad?" "The wedding ring, Grant. From her cedar box. It's gone." I could hear him breathing, hear somebody laughing next to him about something else entirely, completely unbothered, like my whole world hadn't just tipped sideways. "Okay," he said, and his voice slid into that flat, tired register he uses when he thinks I'm making something out of nothing. "It's just a ring, Dad. Relax. Just a ring." "That was your mother's ring, Grant. And Mom's gone, Dad." His voice cracked. But it wasn't grief. It was irritation, like I was the unreasonable one here. "She doesn't need it anymore. I do." Kayla and I needed help with the venue deposit, and you said you couldn't do it right now, so I found a way. Stop making this into something it isn't. You found a way. I repeated it back slow, like I was translating a foreign language in my head. Grant, did you sell it? I gotta go, Dad. We'll talk later. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen holding a phone, gone silent. And I want you to understand, I have never in 63 years of living felt a silence that loud. I want to tell you this came out of nowhere. It didn't. Nothing like this ever does. If you're waiting for me to say my son snapped one day and did something crazy, that's not what happened. What happened was slower than that, quieter than that. It built up one excuse at a time, one he's just struggling right now at a time, until 11 years had gone by, and I woke up a stranger in my own house, financing a life I wasn't invited to be part of. Bethany passed when Grant was 26, pancreatic cancer, 7 months from diagnosis to the funeral. I won't dwell on that part. Some of you already know that particular grief, and you don't need me describing it to you. Some of you don't, and I hope you never do. What I'll tell you instead is what it did to my son and what it did to me, because those two things ended up on a collision course, and it took me 11 years to see it coming. Grant turned his grief outward. Everything became a fight. Everything was somebody's fault, usually mine, even things I had no hand in, the diagnosis, the chemo that didn't work, the fact his mother wasn't there to walk him down the aisle someday. I turned my grief inward and swallowed every bit of it, because I was terrified that if I pushed back on him even once, if I made him sit in a single consequence, I'd lose the only family I had left standing. So I didn't push back, not once, for 11 years. When he was 28, he backed my work van into a parked cruiser outside a bar and told the officer I'd let him borrow it, which I hadn't. I paid the deductible and the fine, and never told him I knew he'd lied. When he started community college for the third attempt at an HVAC certification, he called me crying that the program was rigged against him, that the instructor had it out for him personally. I'd already put almost $15,000 into tuition and books across 3 different programs he never finished. I swallowed it. Told myself, grief takes people different ways and different lengths of time. He never once called me on Father's Day. Not one time in 11 years. I always called him on his birthday. I always sent money, $200 here, $400 there, for rent, for groceries, and I never once asked where it actually went. I told myself he was just finding his footing. I'd cook dinner most nights, nothing fancy, whatever I could throw together after a 10-hour day standing at a table saw, and on the nights he'd actually stop by, he'd sit across from me scrolling his phone through the whole meal. I'd ask about his week. One-word answers. I'd tell him I loved him before he left. Yeah, you too, he'd say. Just that. And I'd tell myself, at least he's still here. At least I haven't lost him too. Here's what I understand now, sitting here telling you this, that I didn't understand then. I thought I was being patient. I thought I was being the bigger man, the understanding father who wouldn't abandon his son the way life had already taken his mother from him. But I wasn't being patient. I was being a doormat, and he knew it. He knew I would never say no. He knew I would never make him sit in a consequence. So somewhere along the way, without either one of us really clocking the shift, I stopped being his father in his eyes. I became an inconvenience he had to manage, a source of funds he never had to say thank you for, not a man who'd lost just as much as he had. The first time I ever told him no, the actual first time, 11 years in, was 15 days before that ring disappeared. He'd called asking for $6,000, half the deposit on a wedding venue out in Columbus, some vineyard place with string lights and a reclaimed barn. I did the math in my head while he talked. 6,000. My property taxes were due that same month, and the shop's slow season hadn't picked back up yet. I can't swing that right now, son, I told him. Not with the taxes coming due. I wish I could. His reaction was immediate. Are you serious right now? I'm serious, Grant. I'm sorry. You know what? Forget it. You've never once actually shown up for me, you know that? You act like helping me is such a burden. You don't want me to be happy, do you? Grant, that's not fair. He hung up before I finished. Didn't call back that night. Didn't call the next day either. I figured that was just him cooling off the way he always did, and in a week or two he'd act like it never happened, same as always. I had no idea he was already sitting in his apartment with his mother's wedding ring in his palm, looking up pawn shops on his phone. I had no idea that in 3 days I'd be standing in a cramped shop off Wayne Avenue, staring through a glass case at the one thing left on this earth that still belonged to my wife. And I had no idea that this time, for the first time in 11 years, I wasn't going to swallow it. Something in me had gone very still, not angry yet. Still, the way water goes still right before it starts to boil. I set my phone down on the counter and stood in that quiet kitchen a long while. Then I grabbed my keys. I didn't turn the radio on. 9 miles from Larchmont Avenue to that stretch of Wayne Avenue where every other storefront is a check cashing place or a pawn shop. And I drove every mile of it in dead silence. Just the rattle of the F-250's engine and my own heartbeat in my ears. You'd think a man driving toward the truth would have 100 thoughts running at once. I didn't. My mind had gone somewhere strange and quiet, almost peaceful. The way I imagine the air goes still right before a storm makes landfall. I thought about Bethany. I thought about the night I proposed on the tailgate of my old Chevy, out past the Yellow Springs quarry, sweating clean through my shirt. That little ring box shaking in my hand, almost as bad as it had shaken 3 days ago, standing over her empty cedar box. I thought about the day the doctor gave us the diagnosis, how she squeezed my hand in that cold little office and said, "Well, at least we've still got each other," like she was the one comforting me. I thought about the promise I made her, unspoken, standing at her graveside, that I'd hold what was left of this family together, that I'd raise our son right, even without her here to help me do it. Some promises you keep by giving everything you've got. Some promises, I was about to learn, you keep by finally taking something back. The shop was called Miami Valley Pawn and Loan. Iron bars on the windows, buzzing fluorescent tubes overhead. The man behind the counter introduced himself as Harlan. I walked the length of the jewelry case and stopped dead. My knees actually buckled a little. There it was, Bethany's ring, sitting under that cheap fluorescent light next to a case of pawned power tools. "Help you find something?" Harlan asked. "That wedding band?" I said, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. "Where'd it come from?" "Young fella brought it in Sunday," Harlan said. "Told me it was an old family piece he'd inherited, needed cash quick. Gave him $220 for it. $220. A ring that took me 4 months of overtime to pay off in 1987, traded for a folding chair and a string of lights at somebody's vineyard wedding. "That's my late wife's wedding ring," I told him. "My son stole it out of my house." Harlan's face went tight. He pulled out an intake log and a photocopy of Grant's driver's license, without me even asking. "Look, man," he said. He signed a statement of ownership, showed valid ID. "Under Ohio law, if it's stolen property, I can't just hand it back over the counter to you. I've got to report it, and the police are going to need proof of ownership before they can put an official hold on it. I've got the original receipt and the appraisal," I said. "From '87. It's in my fireproof box at home." "Bring it," Harlan said, "and I'll call it in right now." 12 hours earlier, if you'd told me I'd be driving back home to grab paperwork so an officer could place a hold on my dead wife's wedding ring, I'd have told you that you didn't know the first thing about me. I'd have told you I'd never let it get that far. I'd have told you I'd find some quieter way to smooth it over, the way I always did. I drove back to the shop 30 minutes later, with the receipt in my hand. The officer who showed up introduced herself as Detective Marisol Reyes. Late 40s, tired around the eyes, the kind of cop who's heard every version of every family story there is, and somehow still manages to sound like she means it when she asks how you're holding up. She took my statement right there at the counter. Cross-referenced the inscription inside the band, "Bethany and me. Forever. The 14th of June, 2087, engraved in tiny script, against my appraisal paperwork, and filled out an evidence hold form." Then she set her pen down, folded her hands, and here's where it got hard. Here's where a stranger looked me dead in the eye and asked the question I'd been too scared to ask myself. "Mr. Voss, I've got to ask you something, and I need you to really sit with it before you answer. This is theft. Pawn fraud, too. since he used false pretenses on that intake form. Combined value on this piece, even the resale figure Harlan's giving me, that puts this over the felony line here in Ohio. Not a slap on the wrist. A felony on your son's permanent record. Are you certain this is what you want? Once I process this, there's no pulling it back. Reyes studied me a second, then nodded slow, like she'd watched somebody make this exact decision maybe a dozen times in her career, and it never once got easier to sit through. All right, she said. We'll get a warrant drawn up. You said he's got a court date coming up already. Unrelated matter. We'll have someone waiting outside the courthouse. She looked at me the way you'd look at a man doing something he wasn't sure was right. Like I was somehow the villain in this story. The father who was supposed to shield his son from the world no matter what he'd done to deserve otherwise. But here's what nobody standing in that pawn shop understood. I'd been shielding him for 11 straight years. And all that shielding had built me a son who genuinely believed consequences were something that only ever happened to other people. I didn't want to punish him. I wanted to save him. And I was starting to understand that sometimes the only way left to save somebody is to let them fall. Harlan held the ring in a small manila envelope while the paperwork finished. When Reyes handed it back to me, I held it a second before slipping it into my shirt pocket, right over my heart, the same spot I'd carried it the day I proposed to her 39 years ago. I drove home with the windows cracked, that October air finally carrying a little bite to it. Somewhere on 75, I pulled my phone out at a red light and made the mistake, or maybe it wasn't a mistake, maybe some part of me needed to see it, of opening Facebook. There he was. Grant and Kayla at that same vineyard, string lights already strung up for some open house event. His arm around her waist, a caption underneath. Can't wait to make this official. Best day coming soon. 43 comments. All of them congratulating him. While I was driving home with his dead mother's wedding ring sitting in my shirt pocket, my son was 30 minutes away, smiling for a camera, with money he'd gotten from selling the one thing that still had her hand pressed into it. And here's the part that scared me a little. I didn't feel guilty looking at that photo. I didn't feel one shred of doubt. I felt something closer to relief, like I'd been holding a hot coal in my bare palm for 11 years, telling myself the burn wasn't really that bad, and I'd finally, just let it drop. I got home a little after 7. The house was quiet, same as it's been for 3 years. I went upstairs, opened the cedar box, and set the ring back exactly where it belonged. I closed the lid slow, the way you'd shut a door on a room you don't plan on going back into for a while. Then I went downstairs, made myself a plate, and sat at the kitchen table alone. 4 days from now, he'll be walking into that courthouse for his court date on the reckless driving charge from the summer, thinking he's got the world handled. He has no idea what's waiting for him outside those doors. I picked up my fork. My hand wasn't shaking. For the first time in 11 years, I wasn't the one absorbing the hit. I was the one who'd finally decided to stop swallowing it. If you've been with me a while, you know this next part is usually where things get hard to sit through. So go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know you're still here. Hit that like button too. 4 days came slow, the kind of slow where every hour drags its feet on purpose. Around 9 that morning, Detective Reyes texted, "Court's at 10, will be positioned outside the west entrance." I didn't go down there to gloat. I didn't go to yell. Some of you might think I should have stayed home and let the officers handle it quiet, but I needed to be there. I needed to stand on those courthouse steps and prove to myself that when he looked for me to swoop in and fix it, I wasn't going to step in front of the train for him one more time. I stood off to the side of the steps, my back against the cold stone, watching the courthouse doors. At 9:52, I saw him come up the sidewalk with Kayla on his arm, laughing at something on his phone, looking completely, uncomplicatedly at ease. 2 plainclothes officers stepped out from near the entrance. Grant Voss. "Yeah, that's me," he said, still smiling, still not understanding. "You're under arrest for theft and pawn fraud. Please turn around and place your hands behind your back." The shift on his face was instant. Shock, then confusion, then something close to real fear. Kayla screamed. A woman nearby had her phone up filming before the cuffs even clicked shut. Grant locked eyes with me across the sidewalk. Dad, Dad, tell them this is a mistake. Dad, please. I didn't move. I didn't say a word. I stood against that cold stone wall with my hands in my jacket pockets and watched the officers walk him toward the car. I watched it the whole way. Then I got in my truck and sat there for a long minute, letting myself feel whatever it was I was feeling. It wasn't joy. I want to be honest with you about that. There was no part of me that felt good, watching my son get walked to a squad car in front of strangers with their phones out. But there was a small, tired, 11 years worn-down part of me that finally exhaled, like I'd been holding my breath since the morning we buried his mother, and I could finally let it go. He called that night. County lockup, one allowed call. And of course it was to me. I almost didn't pick up. I watched the screen ring. His contact photo, a picture from 4 Thanksgivings ago, back when he still hugged me like he meant it. I answered on the 4th ring. Dad. His voice cracked instantly, already. Dad, oh my God, you have to come get me. They're saying this could be a felony. You have to tell them you gave me permission, please. I can't do that, Grant. A beat of silence, then sharper. What do you mean you can't? I'm your son. You're right, I said. You are my son, and I have failed you. I heard his breath catch, like he thought this was the turn, the part where I always softened. For 11 years, I said, I let you treat me like an ATM machine. I let you take from me and never once asked you to give anything back. I let you disrespect your mother's memory. And I told myself I was being a good father by staying quiet through all of it. But I wasn't. I was being a coward. I was so scared of losing you too that I forgot to actually raise you. Dad, please, you don't understand. If this stays on my record, I lose everything. The apprenticeship, maybe even Kayla. I'm not bailing you out. My voice didn't shake. 11 years of swallowing everything, and in that one moment, it didn't shake at all. I'm not hiring you a lawyer. You're going to sit in that cell and think about what you did, and when you get out, you're going to face whatever comes next. You're supposed to be my father, he said, voice cracking into something raw and ugly. You're supposed to protect me. No, Grant, I said. I'm a father who finally loves you enough to let you fail. I hung up. I sat there a long time after, staring at the phone. I thought about Bethany, about what she'd say if she could see this. And I knew she'd be heartbroken. But she'd understand too, because she was the one who taught me, long before any of this, that love without limits isn't love. It's just enabling wearing a nicer name. I had enabled our son right into becoming somebody his own mother wouldn't recognize. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I slept clean through until morning. The consequences stacked up fast, the way they always do once somebody finally stops standing in front of them. Grant spent 2 nights in county before a judge set bail. Bail I didn't post. Kayla's parents posted it for him eventually. The apprenticeship program he'd been coasting through let him go the following week. Not a good fit going forward. Which is corporate speak, for we saw it on the local news too. Because a Dayton man getting arrested outside a courthouse for pawning his dead mother's wedding ring is exactly the kind of story that travels. Kayla's family, the ones footing most of the wedding costs, quietly pulled their support within the week. I heard through my sister that the engagement was off by the following month. Not even a real conversation about it, just silence. The same silence he'd handed me for 11 straight years, finally landing back where it started. He'd spent 2 nights in that holding cell with nothing but his own thoughts. No phone, no Kayla, no filtered photos of somebody else's celebration. Just concrete and the sound of his own breathing. And when he finally walked out into the daylight, he had exactly what he'd said he wanted for 11 years. No father telling him what to do. No rules, no expectations weighing him down. He just didn't understand yet what that actually costs. In the weeks following, I did the work I should have done years ago. I called his landlord, paid the early lease termination penalty since he was behind 2 months already, and turned in the keys. I pulled my name off the credit card he'd been running up and closed the joint account I'd never should have kept open. The financial bleed that had been draining me dry for over a decade finally stopped, all at once, like a valve turning shut. Then, on a Sunday afternoon, he came to the house. I saw him through the front window before he made it up the walk, wearing the same gray hoodie he'd worn to his mother's funeral. He tried his key in the lock. I watched his face when the deadbolt didn't turn. I'd had the locks rekeyed that Thursday. He knocked. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. Beside me sat one duffel bag, packed, zipped shut. "What is this?" he asked, voice already trembling. "Your things, all of them," I said. His face crumpled. "Dad, I have nowhere to go. I have nothing left. This is the part where the old me would have broken. This is the part where I would have said, 'Come inside. Let's talk. Let's figure it out. I'll always be here for you no matter what.'" I said some version of that sentence for 11 straight years, and every single time I said it, I taught him a little more that nothing he did would ever actually cost him anything. Not this time. "You have exactly what you wanted," I told him. "Freedom. No father telling you what to do. No rules. No expectations. You're finally free, Grant. Isn't that what you called me? Controlling. A burden. Well, nobody's controlling you now." "That's not fair," he said. "Fair," I said, keeping my voice level. "You sold your mother's wedding ring for string lights and a barn rental. You told me it was just a ring. Well, this is just a house. Go build your own life. You're on your own now." He stood there on that porch a long while, mouth open, waiting for me to take it back. I'd taken it back for 11 years. Every ultimatum, I mean it this time, every line I drew in the sand that washed out the second he raised his voice enough. I didn't take it back. I picked up the duffel bag and set it down in front of his feet. Then I stepped back inside and closed the door, and I turned the deadbolt. I didn't watch him walk away. I didn't need to. I'd spent 11 years watching him walk all over me. I figured I'd earned the right not to watch this last part. That evening, I made myself dinner. Really made it. Not just something reheated standing over the sink. Grilled a couple of bratwurst on the little back porch grill, the kind you get from the butcher counter at Meijer, the kind Bethany used to make every Labor Day when the whole street would come by. I sat out there and ate slow, listening to the neighborhood settle into evening. Somebody's dog barking 2 yards over, a lawnmower finishing up down the block. After, I went back upstairs, opened the cedar box, and took the ring out. I sat on the edge of the bed and held it in both hands the way I used to, before any of this happened, before a pawn shop, and a courthouse sidewalk, and a duffel bag on the porch. I turned it in the last of the evening light coming through the window, same as it always caught the light. I spent 11 years trying to hold on to a son who didn't want to be held the way I was holding him. I told myself if I gave him everything, every excuse, every dollar, every second chance, he'd stay close. He'd love me back the way I loved him. But he didn't stay. He took. And when he finally took the one thing in this house I could never replace, I understood something I should have understood a long time before. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's a hostage situation, wearing a kinder word. And I was done being the hostage. I closed the box gently, set it back on the dresser. I didn't feel angry sitting there. I didn't feel triumphant either. This was never about winning anything. I just felt quiet, still. The kind of still you only feel once you've finally set something heavy down that you'd been carrying so long you forgot it even had a weight to it. 3 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Not a text, not a call, an actual letter, in his handwriting, no return address. I haven't opened it yet. Some nights I take it out of the drawer where I keep it, and just look at my name written across the front in his handwriting, and I think about what Bethany would tell me to do. I think I already know, but I'm not ready yet, and for the first time in 11 years, I'm allowing myself the truth that I don't owe anybody my readiness on their timeline anymore, not even him. He sold his mother's wedding ring for a barn full of string lights. He said it was just a ring. He walked away with nothing. And for the first time in over a decade, sitting in that quiet house, with the last of the daylight fading through the window, I finally had my life back. If this one sat with you the way I think it might, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And tell me down in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? And would you have opened that letter?